Well, the end of 2014 saw an uptick in foreign buying of domestic property. And John Loos, he's a familiar face in our studio. He's the household and property sector strategist from FNB Home Loans. He joins us now to talk about that. You do this quarterly estate agent survey, very useful, John. There are lots of myths and legends about foreign buyers in South African residential property. One of them being that they've pushed up the prices markedly, especially in a place like Cape Town. So you've done some recent research, and what is it telling us?
Well, I think first, yeah, that myth of pushing up prices, I think it's exaggerated sometimes. The Western Seaboard of Cape Town, yes, probably, big foreign percentage there. But for the markets as a whole, I mean, we're talking 5.5% of total buying estimated to be foreign buying. And I would say that that survey is biased towards the former white suburban areas, and the former township areas significantly less. And it has risen. That's the significant part about it. It's a relatively small part of our market still so far. We are primarily driven by local demand. That's the one thing one must emphasize. But it's increased. The previous quarter was 4.5%. Before that, a couple of percentage points lower. So in recent quarters, it's been ratcheting up, especially in Cape Town, where the agent surveys, they're estimating something like 13%. And what it does tell you is that I think it's more a reflection of property's popularity globally. For the wealthy people the world over, there has been some significant recovery in the popularity of property as a global asset class.
So property is a lot more attractive now. Why are foreigners buying in South Africa specifically versus, say, Europe, where people are saying you need to get into that particular market, or even China?
Well, as I say, I still think they're a relatively small percentage. Although they've been increasing, if you go to places like London, you'll see far greater percentages of foreign owners and buyers in cosmopolitan cities like that. But I suspect that one thing, look, there is a lifestyle aspect to it in cities like Cape Town on the Western Seaboard, very popular. And then, of course, it's a bargain. I think that has something to do with it too. The rand has depreciated quite significantly. So I've taken our FNB house price index and just converted it into dollar, euro and pound terms. And from the end of 2010, we're talking, well, varying in the various three currencies, but 20-odd% down in foreign denominated prices on the end of 2010. So property for foreigners has become a lot cheaper over the last 3 or 4 years.
Isn't there a bit of a paradox here? If the foreign component is actually quite small, as you say, so on the one hand, someone buys your house with dollars or pounds and you get quite a lot of rands for it, but there are not that many alternative buyers at that level in the foreign market. So you almost are put out of the market. If you've bought a house like that, it might be difficult to sell it again to someone else if there are not that many competitors.
I suspect so. I mean, I suspect at times it must be quite difficult to sell those 30 and 50 million rand houses on the Western Seaboard. They're thin markets at the best of times, and it's also very difficult to get a market value. The houses, where foreigners are big players, there's not comparable sales to get a good valuation. You might buy something for 50 million and it might actually genuinely only be worth 40 million. There can be big disparities.
So 2014, we saw foreigners buying South African property. Is this a trend that's going to continue into, say, the first quarter of this year, or even in the next quarter, half year?
I think it possibly will. I think at some point global property is due for some sort of longer-term correction. You look in many centres of the world and these prices are very high by historic standards. But for the time being, the world economy looks to be in a relatively good place. Look, there are cracks showing in China. There's an aging population in Europe. They have their issues. There's high debt burdens in many parts of the world, so there's certain structural issues that need sorting out if the world economy is going to grow nicely and sustainably. But if you just look at this year, that drop in oil prices is the big one, and I suspect that that's a positive, a significant positive for short-term economic growth. You get a slightly stronger global economic growth rate, or even if it just sustains its reasonably good levels, and that should be good for foreign property buying in South Africa.
John, you work and I live in an area on the western side of Johannesburg, around Northcliffe, Fairland Way. Is it my imagination there are a lot more signs outside houses saying for sale and sold? And a year or two ago, I don't think there were any signs around saying that.
I don't know about any signs.
Certainly, I'm noticing them now.
It's a tough one, David. But certainly, if we look at our estate agent surveys in the second half of last year, broadly speaking, the activity levels did rise noticeably on the first half. So, activity levels for agents is, it's not just about people wanting to buy, it's about people wanting to sell. There seems to be a lot more activity in these markets in general over the past half year or so.
So are you saying if you look at property as an asset class for investment, this is also one thing or a trend that's increasing? Are you seeing people putting their money more in property versus other asset classes?
Well, a lot more people, an increase in people buying it's still primary residential demand dominated. There's no buy-to-let frenzy. Our estate agent surveys are talking 9% buyers buying to let. Whereas back in the boom years, about 2004, when we started the survey, it was 25%. So nothing like that. But just this gradual increase in people wanting to buy to live, and of course the buy to let.
Well, thanks to John Loos. He's the household and property sector strategist from FNB Home Loans.